Part 1 at the sound that changed the battlefield. Dawn breaks slowly over the hedgerows of Normandy. A grey mist clings to the damp earth, drifting across shattered farmhouses and shelter-worn fields. Somewhere in the distance, artillery murmurs like distant thunder. American soldiers moved cautiously through the wet grass, boots sinking into the mud, nerves stretched thin between exhaustion and anticipation. In their hands rests a weapon that will quietly redefine modern infantry combat. The walnut stalk is worn smooth from training fields and long marches. Cold steel glints faintly in the pale morning light. And when the first shot rings out, it is followed not by the frantic bolt cycling of older rifles, but by a rhythm fast, deliberate, relentless. The weapon is the M1 Garand. Before its arrival, most soldiers across the world still fought with bolt-action rifles. Each shot required a manual motion: lift the bolt, pull it back, push it forward, lock it down, fire again. In the chaos of battle, those fractions of seconds could mean life or death. But the M1 Garand changed the equation. It fired semi-automatically, using the energy of each shot to chamber the next round. A soldier no longer needed to break his aim or rhythm. 8 rounds sat inside the rifle, ready to fire as quickly as the trigger could be pulled. For American infantrymen, this transformation was more than a technical upgrade. It was a psychological advantage. Against enemies still operating bolt-action rifles, U.S. soldiers could deliver sustained firepower that felt almost overwhelming. The battlefield tempo shifted. Squads could suppress enemy positions faster, move more aggressively, and survive encounters that might otherwise have turned fatal. But the rifle itself did not appear overnight. Its story began decades earlier, in the mind of an immigrant engineer who understood something fundamental about war and human endurance. He believed that a soldier's weapon should work with him, not against him. It should reduce fatigue, increase effectiveness, and function reliably in the brutal conditions of combat. That vision would eventually produce what many military historians consider the most influential infantry rifle of the Second World War. General George S. Patton would later call it the greatest battle implement ever devised. On that quiet morning in Normandy, however, the soldiers holding the M1 Garand are not thinking about history or engineering genius. They are thinking about survival. About the man beside them. About the enemy hidden somewhere beyond the hedges. Then the shooting begins. Part 2 The immigrant who built the rifle. The story of the M1 Garand begins far from the battlefields of Europe. It begins in a small Canadian town, where a young immigrant named John Garand spent his early life fascinated by machines. Born in 1888 to French-Canadian parents, Garand grew up surrounded by the industrial rhythms of the early 20th century, factories humming, steel being shaped into tools, engines, and weapons. Like many brilliant engineers, Garand was quiet, methodical, and relentless in his pursuit of precision. He eventually found work in the United States, where his talent quickly became apparent. By the early 1920s, he was working at the Springfield Armory, one of the most important military research facilities in the country. The U.S. Army had a growing concern. Infantry combat in the First World War had revealed a painful truth: soldiers armed with slow bolt-action rifles were often outmatched by machine guns and automatic weapons. Military planners wanted something new: a rifle that could fire rapidly, yet remain accurate, reliable, and manageable for individual soldiers. Dozens of engineers attempted to solve the problem. Most designs failed. Semi-automatic mechanisms were often too fragile, too complicated, or too sensitive to dirt and mud. Garand approached the problem differently. Instead of chasing mechanical complexity, he pursued mechanical harmony. His rifle used a gas-operated system that harnessed the pressure from fired cartridges to cycle the action smoothly. It was elegant in its simplicity. Years of testing followed. Prototypes jammed. Parts broke. Military committees debated endlessly. Yet Garand refined his design again and again. Each improvement brought the rifle closer to a balance between durability, power, and speed. Finally, in 1936, the U.S. Army officially adopted the rifle as the U.S. Rifle, caliber .30, M1. It was the first standard-issue semi-automatic rifle adopted by any major military power. Garand himself remained humble throughout the process. He rarely spoke publicly and seemed almost uncomfortable with recognition. Yet the weapon he created would soon accompany millions of soldiers into the largest war humanity had ever seen. In workshops and armories across America, the first production rifles began to take shape. Steel receivers were machined with careful precision. Wooden stocks were carved and fitted by skilled hands. Each rifle carried the quiet promise of what it might mean for the men who would one day carry it. None of them knew yet how important that promise would become. Part 3: A Baptism by Fire. By the time the United States entered the Second World War, the M1 Garand had already begun to spread through American infantry units. But war has a way of revealing truths that training never fully exposes. Only the brutal reality of combat could determine whether the rifle would truly deliver on its promise. The proving ground came quickly. In the Pacific, American Marines fighting across jungle islands discovered that the Garand's semi-automatic firepower gave them a crucial edge during close-quarters battles. In dense vegetation where visibility was limited and encounters happened suddenly, the ability to fire multiple accurate shots without manipulating a bolt often decided the outcome within seconds. In North Africa, soldiers fighting across desert landscapes faced German troops armed primarily with bolt-action Kar 98K rifles. While the German weapon was extremely accurate and reliable, its slower rate of fire became a disadvantage during rapid engagements. American squads could deliver a volume of fire that sometimes made their numbers appear larger than they were. Yet the Garand was not perfect. The rifle used an 8-round den block clip that produced a distinctive metallic ping when ejected after the final shot. Some soldiers worried that the sound could reveal their empty rifle to the enemy. Others dismissed the concern entirely, arguing that battlefield noise made the sound nearly impossible to detect. More important was the rifle's rugged reliability. Mud, sand, rain, and freezing temperatures tested the Garand constantly. Despite the harsh conditions, the rifle continued to function with remarkable consistency. For the men who carried it, the Garand became more than equipment. It became a partner in survival. Veterans would later recall the feel of the rifle's recoil against their shoulder, the smell of burnt powder after firing, the solid mechanical snap as each new round chambered automatically. They remembered how the rifle allowed them to stay focused on the fight instead of fighting their weapon. In letters home and quiet conversations between battles, soldiers began to express something unusual about the rifle. They trusted it. And on the battlefield, trust is everything. Part 4: The Rifle of a Nation. By 1944, the M1 Garand had become inseparable from the image of the American infantryman. Millions of rifles had been produced in factories across the United States. Workers, many of them women entering industrial jobs for the first time, assembled receivers, barrels, and stocks with remarkable efficiency. Each completed rifle represented a link between the American home front and the soldiers fighting overseas. Unlike some weapons that remained specialized tools, the Garand became a symbol. Photographs from the war show soldiers climbing ashore on D-Day with Garands slung over their shoulders. Paratroopers dropping into France carried them strapped across their chests. Infantrymen advancing through ruined European cities held them ready as they moved cautiously through shattered streets. The rifle's design balanced power and control. Chambered in .3006 Springfield, it delivered tremendous stopping power while maintaining accuracy at long distances. At nearly 10 pounds, it was heavier than some earlier rifles, but its weight helped absorb recoil and stabilize the weapon during rapid fire. Training manuals emphasized marksmanship, but combat demanded something deeper. Soldiers learned to treat the rifle as an extension of their body. They slept beside it, cleaned it meticulously, and depended on it during moments when hesitation meant death. In many ways, the Garand reflected the industrial and military philosophy of the United States during the war: strength through reliability, simplicity, and overwhelming production. By the end of World War II, over 5 million M1 Garand rifles had been manufactured. They were present on nearly every major battlefield involving American forces. Yet statistics alone cannot capture the meaning of the weapon. Its true significance lived in the hands of the young men who carried it. Farmers, factory workers, students suddenly transformed into soldiers navigating the most violent conflict in human history. The Garand was the tool that stood between them and the enemy. Part 5: The human element. War machines often dominate historical discussions, but weapons themselves are only part of the story. The true narrative of the M1 Garand lies within the experiences of the soldiers who carried it. Imagine a young infantryman, barely 20 years old, standing in the cold forests of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge. Snow falls quietly between shattered trees. Visibility is low. The enemy could appear at any moment. His fingers tighten around the stock of his rifle. The wood feels cold but familiar. Every sound is magnified in the winter silence: distant artillery, the crunch of snow beneath boots, the mechanical certainty of a rifle bolt locking into place. In moments like this, a soldier's weapon becomes more than steel and wood. It becomes reassurance. Veterans would later describe how the Garand allowed them to maintain control during moments of panic. The rifle's semi-automatic action meant they could react quickly when surprised. Its reliability meant fewer catastrophic failures in life-or-death moments. But perhaps the most important element was psychological. Knowing that the rifle could deliver 8 rapid shots without interruption gave American soldiers confidence in engagements where hesitation could be fatal. Many veterans kept their Garands long after the war ended, not as trophies, but as reminders of survival. The rifle had shared trenches, forests, beaches, and ruined cities with them. It had witnessed fear, courage, loss, and endurance. For those who carried it, the Garand was not simply a weapon. It was part of their story. Part 6: The legacy of steel and memory. When the war finally ended in 1945, millions of soldiers returned home. Cities slowly rebuilt. Nations attempted to heal. Yet the legacy of the M1 Garand continued long after the final shots were fired. The rifle served again during the Korean War, carried by another generation of American soldiers fighting in brutal mountainous terrain. Even as newer weapons emerged, the Garand remained respected for its reliability and power. Eventually, it was replaced by more modern rifles with detachable magazines and lighter ammunition. But replacement did not erase its reputation. Military historians would later study the Garand as a turning point in infantry weapon design. It proved that semi-automatic rifles could become the standard weapon of an army. In many ways, it shaped the evolution of future battle rifles around the world. Yet the rifle's greatest legacy is not mechanical. It lives in photographs of soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, rifles resting across their arms. It lives in museums where the worn wooden stocks still carry scratches from distant battlefields. It lives in the memories passed down through generations. Steel eventually rusts. Wood eventually fades. But the stories remain. And somewhere in those stories, the metallic echo of a rifle's final shot still lingers, followed by the unmistakable sound of an empty clip ejecting into the air. Part 7: The echo of history. History does not remember every weapon. Many are forgotten, replaced, buried beneath the constant revolution of technology. But a few become symbols of an era, The M1 Garand is one of those symbols. It represents the moment when industrial innovation met human determination on a global battlefield. It represents the quiet brilliance of an engineer who believed a rifle could help soldiers survive. And above all, it represents the millions of young men who carried it into places where fear and courage existed side by side. Across beaches, forests, deserts, and ruined cities, the Garand spoke with the same steady voice. Shot after shot. 8 rounds at a time. For the soldiers who depended on it, that voice meant something simple and powerful, a chance to live another day. And even now, decades later, when historians study the weapons of the Second World War, one rifle continues to stand apart. Not because it was the most complex. Not because it was the most modern. But because in the hands of ordinary soldiers facing extraordinary danger, it proved itself again and again. A rifle of steel. A rifle of history. A rifle that helped shape the outcome of a war.